I never imagined I'd sit across from my own children and feel like a stranger in my own home. Yet there I was, at the very dining table I bought decades ago after working back-to-back nursing shifts, listening to my son and daughter-in-law tell me, with rehearsed sympathy, that I was no longer safe living alone. Their words were coated in concern, but beneath that thin layer was something colder, sharper, and unmistakably self-serving. Daniel slid a stack of papers toward me as if presenting a contract, not a life sentence. "Mom, it's time. We found a really nice place for you, a nursing home with full support." The way he said it, calm and practiced, told me this conversation wasn't spontaneous. It had been planned, arranged, decided without me. Melissa didn't even pretend to soften the blow. She leaned forward, steepled her manicured fingers, and smiled that tight little smile she used whenever she was about to say something cruel wrapped as kindness. "It's what's best for everyone. Everyone." That single word stung deeper than anything else. Not what's best for me, what's best for them. When I pushed the papers away, Melissa's expression hardened so quickly it was almost satisfying. "Beatrice, you can't manage finances anymore. You'll thank us eventually." Daniel placed his hand on the documents and nudged them closer. "Just sign it, Mom. Don't make this harder." But I knew exactly what this was. And I knew signing would mean surrendering everything I'd worked for. Everything their father and I built. So I stood my ground. And the moment I did, Melissa's mask slipped entirely. She reached across the table, grabbed my wrist, and tried to guide the pen into my hand like I was a child who needed help coloring inside the lines. It wasn't concern. It wasn't love. It was desperation. The kind born when someone's plans are about to collapse. Because this wasn't about safety. It was about my house, my fully paid-off house. The house they had already imagined gutting, redesigning, repurposing to match their new dream lifestyle. The house they believed they were entitled to simply because I was getting older. What they didn't realize was that beneath my quiet routines and soft voice, my mind was still sharp. Sharper than either of them gave me credit for. They didn't know I had overheard their whispered conversations about transferring assets before tax season. And they certainly didn't know I'd already met with a lawyer. When Melissa tried forcing that pen into my hand, something inside me snapped, not in weakness, but in clarity. "Stay with me till the end, because what happens next will shock you. And if you love emotional revenge stories like this, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more." Because after that moment, their plan didn't just unravel. It imploded. My name is Beatrice, and this is my story. Before the betrayal took root, before the lies, the manipulation, the humiliation, Beatrice lived a life that was small, steady, and quietly meaningful. At 74, she wasn't the stereotype people liked to imagine. She wasn't fragile, she wasn't confused, she wasn't someone who needed to be managed. She simply moved slower, thought deeper, and cherished the soft, ordinary rituals that shaped her days. Most mornings began with her stepping onto the back porch, inhaling the crisp air as she checked on her herb garden. Basil, rosemary, mint, each plant tended with care. Her hands were older now, but they were still steady enough to prune delicate stems or roll dough for her lemon scones, a recipe she'd perfected over decades. On weekends, the comforting smell of citrus and butter filled her small kitchen as she baked batches to share with neighbors or to freeze for the grandchildren. Knitting was another quiet joy. Skeins of soft yarn sat neatly in baskets near her armchair, waiting to become blankets for premature babies in the local hospital. It made her feel useful, connected, like her life still rippled out to help others. Her relationship with her son, Daniel, was functional, at best. They loved each other, of course, but it was a strained kind of love. Daniel was always rushing to work, rushing toward money, rushing through life. If he called, it was usually because he needed something, a loan he promised he'd repay, a weekend of free babysitting, or a hand with some home project he didn't want to hire help for. Melissa, his wife, painted a very different picture in public: sweet, respectful, overly complimentary in a way that always felt just a little too rehearsed. Yet when the audience disappeared, her tone changed. Suddenly Beatrice was too slow, too forgetful, set in her ways. Beatrice brushed it off for years. She wanted harmony. She wanted her family close. Even if it hurt sometimes. Still, she showed up. She hosted dinners. She bought gifts. She babysat at a moment's notice. She loved her grandchildren deeply, baking cookies with them, teaching them about soil and sunlight, letting them get dirt under their nails without scolding. Financially, she was comfortable. Not rich. Not struggling. Just stable, with a paid-off home and modest savings. She never imagined that this stability, this house, had become the centerpiece of someone else's quiet, calculated ambition. There were early hints, ones she dismissed at the time. Melissa's offhand question, "Have you updated your will lately?" Daniel's casual comment while touring the house, "You know, Mom, downsizing wouldn't be the worst idea." And those whispered conversations that ended the moment she stepped into the room. "I didn't think much of it," she would later reflect. "I trusted my family. I didn't know a storm was gathering and it was forming right under my own roof." But the storm didn't arrive all at once. It began with tiny red flags, almost invisible at first. The first signs didn't look like signs at all. They looked like harmless moments, tiny shifts, small comments, changes subtle enough that Beatrice shrugged them off. But looking back, every one of them was a brick in the wall that was slowly closing around her. It began with Melissa volunteering, quite suddenly, to help with Beatrice's paperwork. One Thursday afternoon, as Beatrice sat at the kitchen table sorting her utility bills, Melissa stopped by with a bright, too sweet smile. "Let me take over this for you," she said, already pulling up a chair. "Bills can be confusing at your age." Beatrice smiled politely, ignoring the sting. She wasn't confused, she'd managed her finances perfectly well her entire adult life, but she didn't want conflict. So she let Melissa look through the envelopes, though Melissa barely hid her disappointment when she realized everything was already organized. A few days later came the second red flag. Daniel called not to chat, not to check in, but to ask if she had considered giving someone power of attorney, just in case anything happens. Beatrice laughed it off. "I'm still perfectly capable, darling." Daniel didn't push, but the question lingered like a cold draft through an old window. Then there were the unannounced visits. Melissa started dropping by without calling, often letting herself in using the spare key just to check on things. She made comments under her breath about dusty shelves, about the grocery choices, about how elderly people really should have someone supervising their medications. Beatrice wasn't on any medication. But Melissa said it often enough that Beatrice started wondering if Melissa believed her own narrative, that Beatrice was already slipping, deteriorating, fading into incompetence. The third red flag was the most unsettling. Beatrice caught Melissa walking through her bedroom. Not the hallway, the bedroom. Melissa jumped when she realized she'd been seen. "Oh, I was just looking for the bathroom. I got turned around." Beatrice didn't argue, but she didn't believe the excuse either. Not for a second. That bedroom door had been in the same place for 40 years. Still, she swallowed her discomfort. Because conflict, even when necessary, had never been her instinct. The fourth red flag arrived through a seemingly innocent comment from her granddaughter. While helping Beatrice water the herb garden, the girl said casually, "Mom says this house will be ours someday." Beatrice froze, watering can tilted in midair. "Ours?" she asked softly. "Yeah," the child said with a shrug. "She said you won't need it for long." Beatrice smiled for the child's sake, but inside, something cold and heavy settled in her chest. They weren't just thinking about her house. They were planning around it. And for the first time, Beatrice wondered if her age and their assumptions about it had given them permission to start rewriting the boundaries of her own life. She brushed the dirt off her palms, forcing a steady breath. These were no longer harmless comments. They were warnings, quiet ones. And the louder ones were still to come. "I didn't discover the truth in some dramatic confrontation or sudden revelation. It came quietly, slipping into my world through a crack I hadn't known was there. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. It happened on a soft, warm afternoon when I stepped inside to grab my gardening gloves. I heard voices in the living room, hushed, hurried, secretive. They thought I was still outside." Melissa's voice sliced through the air first, sharp and impatient. "The realtor said the market is hot right now. If we get her into the home by next month, we could list this place before spring." "List? This place? My home?" Daniel answered with a frustrated sigh. "I know, but she's resisting everything. I thought she'd sign those papers." "Papers?" "The same papers they'd pushed across my dining table." The ones meant to strip me of decisions, rights, dignity. Then Melissa said the words that cracked something deep inside me. Make her. She's old, Dan. She's losing grip. Use that. Use that. Use me. I stepped backward on instinct, my pulse hammering so hard I felt it in my fingertips. My own son and his wife weren't concerned about my well-being. They weren't trying to protect me. They were plotting around me like I was an obstacle, a financial inconvenience that needed to be moved out of the way. I slipped out of the house before they noticed, but the conversation echoed in my mind long after. Their motives weren't complicated at all. Melissa's sister had just bought a larger home, and Melissa had been seething with envy for months. Every visit, every dinner, every casual chat had included some complaint about space, about upgrades, about wanting something better. Daniel, on the other hand, had been drowning in stress, promotions that never came, bills piling up, a lifestyle he insisted on maintaining. My fully paid-off home wasn't just appealing to them, it was their shortcut. Soon, the shift in their behavior became impossible to ignore. Melissa started helping by reorganizing my drawers, conveniently misplacing documents she later claimed I had lost. Daniel began speaking slower, with exaggerated pauses, as if explaining things to a child. Then came the family dinner, the night Melissa looked around and said, loudly, I worry about the kids around all the clutter and old person stuff here. The house was spotless. But the insult wasn't about cleanliness. It was about positioning me. The final blow landed at the doctor's office. Daniel insisted on joining me for support, then tried persuading the physician to note cognitive concerns I didn't have. I stared at him, stunned. He smiled, as if I should be grateful. In that moment, I realized what he was trying to do, slowly build evidence to declare me incapable. Not because I was, but because it served their purpose. And as that realization settled, something inside me shifted, hardened. Because they were about to push one step too far, and that step would change everything. The weight of it all didn't come crashing in a single moment. It crept into my life quietly, like fog rolling over a familiar landscape, obscuring everything I thought was safe and steady. Every whispered comment, every casual insult, every attempt to undermine me began to accumulate, pressing down on my chest, on my mind, on my spirit. I found myself constantly second-guessing. Did I leave the stove on? Did I forget a payment? Was the garden overwatered? Not because I had ever been careless, but because Daniel and Melissa had made me doubt myself, subtly, endlessly, until even the simplest tasks became fraught with tension. Their eyes lingered just a second too long, their questions carried an edge that made me pause, reevaluate, and hesitate. Some nights, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the shadows dancing on the walls from the flickering lamp, my knitting abandoned on the couch beside me. Tears would come quietly, because I could not let them see. Not then. Not ever. The betrayal cut deeper than anything else, not just the fear of losing my home, but the realization that my own flesh and blood could see me as an obstacle, as a problem to be solved rather than a mother to be loved. Even small moments became battles. Melissa helping in the kitchen, rearranging drawers, or moving my documents under the guise of tidying up, left me feeling violated in my own space. Daniel's condescending explanations of simple things, his tone slower, deliberately patronizing, convinced me they were testing me, setting traps to justify their eventual actions. The house, once a haven, felt like a stage where I was being scrutinized, evaluated, and found wanting. I tried to confide in no one. Friends were far, busy, or oblivious to the undercurrents that had begun to dominate my life. Even my grandchildren, sweet and innocent, were pulled into the periphery, kept at a distance by Melissa's careful control. I watched them play, laughed at their jokes, but a hollow ache lingered. They were slowly being taught that this home, and perhaps I, were no longer safe territory. And yet, beneath the fear and loneliness, a quiet, simmering awareness began to grow. The sense that I could not allow this to continue. That if I did not fight back, the house, the dignity, the life I had built would be stripped away quietly, irrevocably. I felt invisible. I felt powerless. But I was not defeated. Because the storm I had sensed all along, the one hidden in whispered conversations and casual comments, was about to break. And when it did, everything would change. The subtle undermining had been unbearable, but it was nothing compared to what came next. The betrayal that had been whispered and hinted at became overt, cruel, and calculated. Daniel and Melissa no longer hid their intentions. Every visit, every word, every glance was layered with manipulation designed to push me toward surrender. It began one morning when Melissa called in fake distress. "BA," she said, voice trembling like it was about to shatter, "you left a burner on. The house could have caught fire." I knew immediately she was lying. I had checked the stove myself, twice. But Daniel rushed over, horror written across his face, as if the very air of my home had suddenly become dangerous. "Mom, this is serious," he said, placing a hand on my arm. "You can't keep doing this alone." I shook him off gently, trying to hide my anger. "I'm perfectly fine," I said. "I checked everything." Daniel's sigh carried impatience. "You don't even realize you're putting yourself at risk. That's the scary part." The fear he tried to project wasn't for me, it was a weapon, a shield for their greed. And it worked, at least for a moment, until I felt the anger rise, a cold determination replacing the hurt. Soon after, they arrived with brochures, forms, and schedules. The nursing home they had been pressuring me toward was no longer a suggestion. It was a plan already in motion. "All you have to do is sign," Melissa said sweetly, too sweetly. She smiled in a way that made my skin crawl. "We've even reserved a room for you. You'll be so happy." I stared at the papers, feeling the weight of betrayal. Weeks of manipulation, whispers, and half-truths had built to this moment. Daniel leaned forward, his tone low and firm. "It's for your own good, Mom. We just want what's best." But I saw through it. I always had. This wasn't about my well-being. It was about the house. My home. Everything I had built and earned. And then came the most audacious twist of all. A formal letter arrived, mailed by Melissa, stating that Daniel was applying for legal guardianship over me due to declining cognitive ability. They had created a paper trail, carefully documenting moments of confusion that never existed. They had built their argument on lies, hoping I would be too overwhelmed to notice until it was too late. I remember holding that letter in my hands, the edges crisp and cold, and realizing the truth. They believed they could erase me, quietly, legally, without resistance. They were blind to one thing: the fire inside me had already ignited. They thought they were controlling the story. But they hadn't counted on the storm that was about to turn in my favor. The day they tried to force the pen into my hand, everything crystallized. All the whispers, the manipulation, the patronizing comments, the stolen documents, the fake emergencies, it all collided into one unbearable, electric moment. That morning started like any other, but the tension in the air was already thick, heavy with unspoken plans. Daniel and Melissa arrived together, carrying that same calm, rehearsed air they always wore when executing their schemes. The papers were already on the dining table, neat stacks like contracts ready to seal my fate. Melissa gave me that polite, too bright smile. "Good morning, Mom. We thought we'd go over a few things." I knew exactly what things meant. My heart pounded, but I forced a smile, trying to mask the storm inside. "Mom, it's time," Daniel said, sliding the documents forward. "We've found a wonderful place for you. Everything is taken care of." "Take care of what?" I asked quietly, keeping my voice steady. Melissa leaned back and crossed her arms. "Oh, just your living arrangements. You'll thank us eventually." Eventually. Their word, carefully chosen, wrapped in patronizing sweetness. I stood, my hands trembling not from fear but from the adrenaline of defiance. "I'm not signing anything," I said. Melissa's eyes flickered with irritation, a sharp edge that cut through her rehearsed charm. "Beatrice," she said slowly, deliberately, "we're only trying to help. You can't manage everything anymore." I clenched my fists at my sides, my pulse in my ears. I saw the greed behind her mask, the impatience, the entitlement. I saw it in Daniel's tight jaw, the way his hand hovered over the papers like he wanted to force them into my life. Then came the moment that shattered the veneer completely. Melissa reached across the table and grabbed my wrist, guiding the pen toward my hand with a force that surprised me. Her grip was firm, possessive, the physical embodiment of everything they had been trying to take from me: control, property, independence. My body stiffened. My eyes locked on hers. "No," I whispered, shaking my hand free. Daniel's face paled, a flash of frustration, almost panic. "Mom, please, it's easier if you just..." "Easier for who?" I cut him off sharply. Not for me. Not for anyone but yourselves. The air between us was thick, tense, charged with unspoken fury and betrayal. I felt the weight of years of manipulation pressing down on me, but something inside broke in a way that was liberating. In that instant, clarity hit me like a thunderbolt. They weren't trying to protect me. They weren't worried about my safety or well-being. They were plotting, scheming, building a case to take everything I had earned. My home, my independence, my dignity, all dangling at the whim of their selfish ambition. I stepped back, heart racing, a fierce determination coursing through me. This was the moment I knew I couldn't just survive anymore. I had to fight. This was the moment I knew I had to do something. And from that spark, a plan began to form, a plan that would turn the tables in ways they never imagined. Once the fire had been lit inside me, there was no going back. I wasn't going to sit quietly while Daniel and Melissa tried to erase my life, strip me of my home, and rewrite the narrative of my independence. I had spent decades building a life, every brick, every corner of this house a testament to my work and my love, and I wasn't about to let it be stolen. The first step was strategy. I revisited the lawyer I had quietly consulted weeks earlier, laying out every incident, the whispered plans, the stolen documents, the fake emergencies, the attempt to secure legal guardianship under false pretenses. Every conversation, every snide comment, every subtle manipulation, it became evidence. I documented it meticulously, knowing that when the time came, this record would be my weapon. Next, I reclaimed my space. Melissa's habit of reorganizing my drawers and moving important papers came to a stop the moment I started locking critical documents in a safe. Daniel's patronizing tones and slow explanations were met with firm, confident responses. I stopped engaging on their terms. I started dictating the terms myself. Then came the small victories, each one a taste of the justice I had long deserved. I subtly reminded Daniel of financial matters they had assumed I was unaware of, overdue bills they forgot to pay, investments they hadn't considered, and watched as their confident composure cracked. Melissa's careful veneer of politeness began to slip under the weight of her own impatience, the rehearsed smiles fading when I refused to be intimidated. The ultimate move came when I leveraged their greed against them. I proposed a payment plan for their access to certain resources they assumed were theirs by right, portions of the garden for their parties, storage rooms for their belongings, and even minor household privileges. Every agreement was documented, every term binding. Suddenly, the tables had turned. The power they thought they wielded was now a structure of my design. They had assumed I was weak. They assumed I would bend. But every step of their plan had been anticipated, and every move they made now played into my hands. By the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. Their sense of entitlement, their confidence, their illusions of control, all dismantled by the quiet, deliberate moves of someone they had underestimated. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't seeking vengeance for vengeance's sake. I was reclaiming what was mine. Every favor they thought they could force, every attempt to control me, became a lesson in accountability. The house, my life, my dignity, all restored, all defended, all on my terms. Because for the first time in months, I felt the power of clarity, of justice, of turning betrayal into triumph. The aftermath of their failed scheme was quiet but absolute. Daniel and Melissa, who had spent months carefully orchestrating their plans, were forced to face the consequences of underestimating me. What had once seemed like small, harmless manipulations now crumbled under the weight of evidence and careful countermeasures. Melissa was the first to show cracks. Her rehearsed smiles faltered when I calmly referenced the documented incidents, the moved papers, the whispered conversations, the false claims she'd tried to use against me. Every attempt to gaslight or intimidate was met with firm, unyielding boundaries. She realized, slowly, that her charm and manipulations were no match for preparation and clarity. Daniel's frustration grew over time. He had assumed that my age or gentle nature would make me pliable, easy to maneuver. But as the lawyer's letters arrived and agreements were enforced, his confidence wavered. Even his casual, patronizing comments were met with precise reminders of their responsibilities and limits. Every time he attempted to pressure me, the legal safeguards and the payment plan I had implemented turned his effort into a self-defeating move. They began to argue in front of one another, their alliance faltering as they realized their plan had not only failed but backfired. The house they thought was an easy prize became a fortress, legally protected, emotionally defended, and under my full control. Most importantly, I regained my sense of peace. The anxiety and fear that had haunted my days melted away as I walked through my home, tending to the garden, baking for the grandchildren, and reclaiming the spaces that had been theirs in imagination but never in reality. The tension that had lingered in every corner was replaced with a quiet, satisfied calm. Justice hadn't come through vengeance, and it hadn't needed to. It had come from clarity, preparation, and the simple refusal to surrender. Daniel and Melissa had learned the hard way that underestimating someone's strength, especially a mother defending her life and home, is a dangerous mistake. The house was mine, the dignity intact, and for the first time in months, I felt truly safe and respected in my own life. Looking back, I realized the story of what happened wasn't just about a house, or papers, or even the betrayal of my own children. It was about recognizing the subtle ways people can try to diminish you, the ways love can be twisted into entitlement, and the quiet courage it takes to reclaim your life. I could have given in. I could have let fear and politeness dictate my actions. But I chose otherwise. I hope my story reminds you that age, kindness, or trust should never be mistaken for weakness. Just because someone expects compliance doesn't mean you are obligated to surrender. Your autonomy, your dignity, and your boundaries are yours to defend fiercely and unapologetically. It's also a reminder that betrayal often comes quietly, wrapped in concern or family obligations. Pay attention to the small signs. Trust your instincts. Document, protect, and act with clarity when necessary. Revenge isn't about cruelty, it's about justice, about reclaiming what was meant to be yours all along. Most of all, I've learned that peace comes not from avoiding conflict, but from facing it with awareness and confidence. Protect your space, protect your mind, and protect your heart. And when others underestimate you, let it be the spark that ignites your strength. My home is safe. My life is mine. And I am stronger than I ever realized. Never underestimate yourself, because sometimes, the quietest storm can change everything.